This is the Life Futures Talk, the final conversation of a year-long project that invited philosophers and practitioners to discuss and reflect upon the conditions under which life exists today. A moment when the world is hit by a global pandemic, when the effects of global warming are tangibly perceptible and racial capitalism prevails, we ask how life is seen differently today. The question draws on the seminal work of Cameroonian philosopher Achille Mbembe on the need for a new theory of life. Mbembe says that we are in a new epoch now, characterized by a shift from concerns with how life emerges, is distributed, and the conditions of its evolution and resilience, and I'm quoting here, to starting to wonder wherever life is involved about the conditions in which life will end. So the pandemic was the backdrop to the beginning of the Life Futures project, as you all know, an event that has dramatically changed a lot of the world we were used to know, but not because those conditions are radically new, they were only accelerated. It comes to mind the new forms of remote labor, automation of workers, the new working from home that feels like living at work, the rampant presence of surveillance capitalism disguised as public health measures, and the radicalization of far-right sentiments and political projects across the globe. Moreover, we know that different geographies and groups of our societies were also affected unevenly, since racial, economic, and social divide hasn't been eroded, rather reinforced throughout this process. So the Life Futures Project commissioned artists Hannah Honeywill, Melissandre Varin, Patricia Domínguez, and Antonia Taulis, and postcoronialism, here today represented by Abhijan, Toto, and Jessika, Khazrik, to help unpack these questions. Their works can be seen on the link provided below in the video details as part of the Life Futures exhibition. And this conversation is an opportunity to hear from the artists about the new works exploring the conditions of life during the pandemic and also imagining new possibilities for a post-COVID future. I will moderate, my name is Carolina Rito. I'll be moderating the conversation with my colleagues and co-leads of the Life Futures project, Daniele Lorenzini and Federico Testa. And the project is supported by Coventry University, Warwick University, and the Herbert Gallery and Museum as part of the citywide initiatives of the Coventry City of Culture. So thank you so much to all of you for being here today and engaging in this conversation, and also to very generously responding to the initial invitation to help us unpack these questions around the new conditions of life forms today. So I will hand over to Daniele to start with a few questions.
Hi, everyone. I guess that I have a couple of questions for Hannah first, and perhaps Hannah can also, of course, just feel free to address these questions while also talking more broadly about your work. And the two questions that I wanted to ask you are the following. The first one is that I was interested in knowing perhaps a bit more about your work and your engagement with everyday ordinary objects, in this case with the IKEA chair, and the meaning that it takes in this specific artwork. When I feel like we were all confronted with an extraordinary event, the pandemic, so something that none of us actually had ever experienced before during our lifetime. So how do you conceive this relationship between working with an ordinary object to reflect on an extraordinary event? And perhaps I can ask the second question later if you want to start saying something about this.
Sure, okay. That's a really interesting question, thank you. And I think This kind of artwork came out of watching my partner from when she works for the local authority, the council, and was normally out in the community doing a job, interacting with people. And then when the pandemic hit, she had to like revert to going into this tiny little room, sitting in front of a screen and doing these things that you normally have to do face to face, on, suddenly on a screen, and then dealing with the people that she manages, all having the same crises that we're all having of, dealing with our everyday life being completely turned upside down. So, our liberty of being able to leave our homes, do our shopping, take our kids to school, etc., all been taken away from us. So suddenly, from this expansive place that we kind of shrunk down, and it was just the everyday conversations after finishing work, and just over the period of time, 9 months, 12 months of just hearing this, like, oh, I don't know if I can take this anymore. I can't sit in front of this screen for 9 hours a day anymore. It's just getting to me, and I could just see that although like physically being still exactly the same person, there was these sorts of scars appearing, in a way, like a kind of mental scars starting to take effect, and the energy and our ability to cope was starting to, it was like, the classic straw that breaks the camel's back, that kind of feeling was starting to happen. And so, to sort of go back to your question about the everyday object, I think it was the thing that was most affected was our everyday, the fact that, that was disrupted. So for me, to use the everyday object seems a very obvious thing to do, because it was, it kind of really represented how, but by me interacting with that everyday object and disrupting it is a very neat analogy to how the pandemic has affected us. I mean, there's other, historically, as an artist, I've used everyday objects because, especially furniture, because they offer a sort of universality, particular genderlessness. Although saying that, they do have a history. So, for example, the IKEA chair that I did use on purpose because of its ubiquitous nature. It's like the £20 chair out of the IKEA range. So a lot of people may have had them in their homes, sat on them in cafes. They would have encountered them. I also was looking at the work of Susan Shipley, and she talks about the material witness, and looking at the idea that, material contains these other histories, these other events, and kind of did some digging and actually found out that kind of, although IKEA has a sort of good guy, sustainable corporate sort of identity, that actually that kind of range of chairs came out of wood that has a slightly problematic history, in the sense that they went and invested with Harvard University and bought up a load of Romanian forest, and it's the wood from that kind of ancient forest that's sort of got how to put it, like illegally got into the processing chain and produced those chairs. So there is a sort of hint of corporate corruption and environmental terrorism, whilst simply being a chair at the same time. So kind of ties into maybe the possibilities of how this pandemic all began in the first place.
Thank you, Anna. I find this really powerful and interesting, and at the same time, I was also thinking of the last kind of part, the last segment of the video, and also of the soundtrack, and so perhaps you could say something more about this last part, the part of the mending. So you have the first part of the video, and of the soundtrack that is about the disruption, right? And then you have the conclusion that is about how do we mend both the chair and our lives. And I found that really powerful, and I wanted to to kind of ask, what relationship do you see between the title of the work, Resilience, 1631 Alls, mending, and the reconstruction of a shared future world after the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting for me to, when I conducted those interviews, I didn't really know how they would, they're interviews, you don't necessarily know what the responses are going to be. And what I found actually quite astounding was the fact that both of them, who had very different experiences, so Scott, who was sort of being treated for and surviving the treatment of myeloma cancer, and then Daisy, who was getting her life back after full-time work and full-time childcare. And actually, I think Daisy makes the statement that I feel powerful. This has empowered me, and I was really taken aback. I just thought, wow, I didn't necessarily expect those responses. And then Scott's response that actually, if you could have had myeloma diagnosis at any point in the world, this is the perfect time to have it, because everybody is isolating with him. Everyone is taking precautions and wearing face masks and stopping, like infection spreading. So, who would have thought I would have that wasn't a kind of resolution that I was going to come to in the video. And so the idea of the chair itself, which has had the 1,631 holes drilled into it, representing each person who died on the 26th of January, when we went over it into 100,000 deaths. So for me, I'm making those holes, I'm making those marks whilst listening to that narration and thinking about what they're talking about. And then this sort of resolution that happened was, so the idea of putting the sawdust back with the glue, so that the stuffing that came out of the chair, the sawdust that came out of the chair, goes back into mending the chair and completing it. Maybe completing is the wrong way, but like to bring it back to a form that it was. Although, it's clear in the film that it's not completely filled up. The mass that is left is not the mass that returns. There's definitely some spaces and divots left, and scarring and effects left from that process, which, is the same kind of metaphorically for our own experiences. I think the idea of mending is, like you look at the definition of to mend, and it is to make something whole again. And what's interesting is the assuming the again, so if we take that as a sort of political or economic sort of statement, that we want to reassume or return to where we were, that maybe isn't necessarily what we want to do. And actually we kind of have this opportunity to reassess our recovery. So, just as a very simple, if I was to restore a chair, you'd make an assessment of what is in badly need of stabilizing, what is need of totally removing and putting back again, or putting a new prosthetic on, or do I go back into research and look at the finish and to see if I need to match that finish, or do I put a new layer on that's obviously a new layer? So I think that's something that coming out of this pandemic that is something to think about. And I just think, listening to the other work that's been made as part of this project, there is a sort of talking about the care and support and healing that was required for us to get through this. So, and I think maybe that's something that we need to take forward in terms of mending, is that's the thing that we mend with. I hope that sort of goes some way to answering your question.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Yeah, do you want to?
Sure, yes. Thank you, Hannah. I wanted now to ask a few questions to postcolonialism, so Abhijan and Jessika. I was very intrigued. So first, just to say that your contribution is a podcast of a recorded conversation between yourselves and also other members of postcolonialism, which is a group that was formed after the beginning of the pandemic, precisely to be reflecting on the major consequences, politically speaking, of the pandemic on the ecologies in which you're living, but also in a very, and that's pretty clear after listening to the podcast, to also be reflecting on the more kind of private, individual, intimate level as well of the repercussions and consequences of what was happening. So postcolonialism was a group that was formed to be to bring people together, to be thinking together about this. And I was really impressed when you said that you were meeting weekly, because in a moment when most of us were struggling with screen time and just kind of trying to move away from the screen as possible, obviously there was something also being rehearsed at the same time. That was this remote connectivity. And I think postcolonialism speaks directly to that. And I would just also mention who are the other people you are in conversation with as part of the podcast. And so, as I said before, it's yourself, Abhijan, Toto, and Jessika, Khazrik, but also Wing, Nge, Mirella, Basiak, Jens Chong, Mary Magic, and finally Laure Desailly. And so I wanted to ask you, what was those meetings, those weekly meetings, doing for you, given the conditions in which you were? And if somehow, and this is something you mentioned very much in the podcast as well, is how that was reconfiguring modes of solidarity, and if it was at all.
Yeah, Jessika, do you want to go ahead first?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with how postcolonialism started. So it started very serendipitously, and I think also serendipity is one of the things that was very much lost during the lockdown, when everything had to be super bureaucratized and planned. And it's really, basically, I just invited Abhijan and another friend, Ajij, to just like join a conversation together, and just did like a jitsi room called postcolonialism. And then Abhijan was like, oh my God, postcolonialism, this is where we are. It really felt super resonant on different levels. So Abhijan invited two friends, and each friend so people invited each other. And then 2 days after, I think it was a Tuesday, and we decided to speak on Thursday. We were 8 people the first time. So then we started speaking every Thursday, like sometimes every Thursday a month, sometimes 3 Thursdays a month for 3 hours. We would speak between like my time, because it was just like a few days after I moved to Berlin. I moved to Berlin from Beirut 2 days before the first lockdown. And so from my time in CET, it was from 3 to 6, and it was a time zone that worked for us all, because we ended up being distributed along like 8 different time zones. And yes, there's this really intimate connection between us, but also it's at a time that's really important, where there's like protests and uprisings happening concurrently in different places in the world. So, and I do think that we need to, in a way, go back into how capitalism alienates us and depersonalize us to be able to transformatively connect together. So I feel the intimacy came out of the care, because like one of the major things, for instance, that we've been discussing is how to create an unmilitarized emergency response, where we saw, that During the pandemic, the military was in a way sent out very actually expectedly if we look at the global economy that we live in, and also like state architectures, to take care of a huge health crisis where the military serves the order of death, not the order of, not life, there's nothing healing about militarization. So in the conversation, it was also very much around, it was at a time where there's been new legislations around, new security legislations coming up in different places, criminalizing solidarity, but also incarcerating a lot of people organizing. And this was the case, for instance, in the conversation inside of the Open Solidarity and Study and Strategy group. There were members from Hong Kong, from Philippines, from Lebanon. So it was really, So in a way, it's also seeing that we are multiple also in different places, dealing with similar and also with similar problems, but also coming from a shared source. But every locality has its own specification. So it was really very much of like a intimate, in a way, universal gathering. So this is just like a background about how it started. Abhijan, you want to chime in?
Yeah, Jessika, thanks so much for that. I mean, it's really kind of funny and really nice to be able to reflect on this. I mean, thinking about sort of how something that really just came out of this conversation between us and sort of grew into a kind of community where a lot of us are still, I mean, it's been a community where many of us have been doing things together for years before, but kind of brought together. I mean, I think that like it kind of started with us wanting our friends and our colleagues in different places to meet each other and to spend time together, and kind of grew into this this sort of space of collective study. And as Jessika said, thinking alongside what does it mean to have solidarity. I mean, as as she was saying, that it was at this time when we were seeing all of, and we were part of so many of these movements that were happening concurrently, and wanting to share. I mean, just share sort of our experiences and share what was going on the ground. I mean, and really to kind of and really to think about where we could begin to kind of construct these modes of solidarity. I mean, for myself as well, because I was this has been this pro-democracy movement in Thailand where I am. That's been unfolding for several years, but at the same time, for a large part of last year, I was unable to come back precisely because of this kind of militarization of borders, this kind of this deployment of border regimes against those it deems alien, against those it deems outside of it. So I think that for a lot of our conversation, these points kind of became things that we kind of came back to. I mean, as you were saying, that this having to meet all the time, every Thursday, I think it sounds like something quite daunting, but at the same time, it also became, I mean, like about an hour or so of that would just be us checking in with each other, just saying, okay, like what's happening with you, what's happening where you are right now, and kind of reflecting on some of these, I mean, often sort of like, kind of personally traumatizing things, or things that were kind of traumatizing to our communities wherever we were. I think a lot of the particularly traumatizing stories we were hearing were from our colleagues in Singapore, from our friend Luca, who's part of a collective in Singapore, but just hearing about, particularly these kinds of extremely dictatorial militaristic responses that they were kind of unfolding there at a particular pace. This is also the period when they were kind of locking migrant workers in these kind of hellish abandoned buildings, etc. From that to sort of these broader questions of what is a non-military response, what is a different modality of thinking about healthcare, what is another way of thinking about our relationships to devaluation. And Jessika, maybe that's something that you want to kind of maybe touch upon, because I think we also talked about it a little bit in the podcast.
Yeah, so for instance, when the pandemic started, there's been a lot of conversations all over around, oh, now we're having something close to the universal basic income. Well, actually, it's only in some places in the world, and it is totally a very national basic income. And think the idea of a universal basic income would first really demand the toppling down of capitalism. In my understanding, I don't think we can have universal basic income and have capitalism continue as such, because the way capitalism works is that it's a very fortified space with borders, and the discrepancy between values and currencies is very much what, in a way, makes this type of labor possible and this type of exploitation. So this is like one of the things we're talking about, like devaluing all currencies, you know. Another thing also, like, I think this is really important in terms of the conversation that were made possible because we were all over the world, and we were in different places at the same time, but not all over the world. It actually also got me to realize more that if we come to think about it, even if the economy of technology that we have today is super hyper-capitalist, which is totally expected. Surveillance capitalism, if we come to think about it as an outcome, is totally expected because of the militarized history of the internet, but also because we live in a militarized economy. This is what capitalism is. It really got me to think, you know, that even if like the architecture is faulty in several places and there's still a lot of work to be done on the level of encryption, we still haven't like really organized on a big scale concurrently in terms of transformational politics. And I think, and I also, for several reasons, I do understand why, because if you're very much in a place of crisis and you don't know how you will be living tomorrow, you know, it's really hard to think on a bigger scale. And usually, like, who thinks on a bigger scale is like, you know, these multinational companies, you know, like the oil companies, things like that, because this is where their exploitation comes from, you know. But then it also made me think of something that I'm sure I'll be thinking of for the rest of my life, which is that the fact that in a way capitalism is so ubiquitous and permeating is usually a force that we think makes it much stronger, but I also think that it is a force that can make it weaker, you know, because if you also have concurrent events happening at the same time, you know, this can very much weaken the structure and the flow of capitalism. And this is something that that also I learned collectively through postcolonialism during the pandemic. So, but also as Abhijan was saying about sharing trauma, and also we talk about this in the podcast, we've passed through a lot collectively all over during the pandemic, and with the nature of the confinement that happens, and then the rhythm of things opening up, and also our basic needs as living organisms, it's really worrying now to see that that this whole experience, which really needs to be processed in order for us to heal from, can be very easily like brushed off under the carpet, you know, because it's like we just got back to the former rhythm, but the former rhythm is so toxic by itself. So this is why I think like this is like the beginning of post-colonialism, but this is a gathering and a congregation that can take different forms. So what we did this year, for instance, is we co-developed like an online platform that where metadata is encrypted, and we made like a very simple open source forum that in a way we're now looking for resources how we could develop. But there's something also very endearing that this is not an institutionalized project. No one commissioned this. This is really born out of the urgent need for interdisciplinary care and talking together about what we're passing through in this really worrying worldly transformations.
Thank you. Oh, that's fascinating. I wanted to know more about that platform, Jessika, actually. But let me just go back to the podcast, because I think an interesting thing that the podcast also captures is the sort of difference between what were the conversations back during lockdown and now you speaking in a different temporality. So post-lockdown and post as well, like the immediate surprise of what's going on. So eventually we can argue we know a little bit more about not only the virus necessarily, but about the consequences and the impacts that had on different scales and different ecologies. And you talk in the podcast, a few of you also share some quite traumatic experiences precisely post-lockdown. And I was wondering, in relation to the militarization of our lives and the public space, because these events that you mentioned in the podcast happen in arguably public spaces, if I understood them correctly. I think I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you see those forms of, I think, resilience, solidarity, depends how we want to name them, that were generated during the pandemic or during the lockdown through the post-colonialism conversations, and what you are encountering today. And because the way I see solidarities is not necessarily that they cease to exist in the past. They necessarily need to be restructured every time because the conditions change. So once again, conditions changed, and post-colonialism eventually will also mutate with that as a form of solidarity within that particular ecology. You mentioned already the online platform, but you want to talk a little bit more to the current experiences and how you think that the platform will also continue evolving.
Just to recap, so Mary Magic was talking about like a racial attack that she had in the subway in Vienna. And I was also talking about like a racial attack that I had in a cafe in Putbus, in like north of Germany. And then we were all of us talking about how, you know, like the whole heightened presence of the police that we have now, as in a way, let's say like a post-colonial also outcome. But that is already, you know, at the heart of the nation, and the problem that many communities have been struggling with for more than decades, for centuries. So like the idea also of how, like, you know, this whole over-policing, where actually we've been increasingly assaulted, and it's all because of issues related to racism. And we also spoke about a certain frustration with like a violence that, and this is, I think, what's amazing about postcolonialism is like we're talking about things that we still don't have very much terms to use, you know, that to describe. But we were talking about, because we both had this experience, Maria and myself, you know, the violence of like when you're attacked, people just watch you. You know, like people watch and don't do anything. And this is very much the opposite of solidarity. And it's beyond, it's a very specific type of complicity, but also I think there is some sort of like also social policing within that. We've been talking also from last year a lot around how like neighbors policing each other or things like that. And what you said also, Carolina, around solidarity as something that needs to be revived, I totally agree, but I also feel that, and this also came through different conversations, that in a way, solidarity is like a common language that we all need to learn. And we need to learn not because it's not something that is inherent within us. I think solidarity is something that's truly inherent within people. Like, I mean, I can talk from my experience during the Lebanese uprising, you know, it's like where the first 11 days were like 11 days of public strikes that we organized. We just go to the street and block the roads, and also like the amount of healing that happened that you need to sustain for it to be really transformative healing. You realize that in a way, when you remove these apparatuses, people know how to be political together. Like, you know, like this is nothing, actually it's something to unlearn rather than learn, you know, like we know like care is very also inherent to life, the practice of life, and we're all living, you know. But then the thing with solidarity, and if we see like a lot of the solidarity campaigns that happened last year, it ends up becoming this whole like branding apparatus, you know, advertisement. It's like these are the tools that are prevalent within capitalism, and it becomes, in a way, very much this like tactical thing that's not strategic because it doesn't transform on like the long term level. So, but the thing is, why I feel it's something that we need to learn is that I also find it always very strange that solidarity also becomes something that is in a way like telepathic, or it becomes something that is outside of action. Well, I think some strategies could be like solidarity needs to act in certain strategies that are also very much that can be evident in policies, they can be evident in the ground in like transformations of institutions. There can be also solidarity between different practitioners of different knowledges, but I feel that we kind of, in a way, like it just seemed to us during the conversation also is about how much, in a way, like the kleptocratic order that we live in, that's based on theft, is also based on, like in a way stealing what universalisms can be. Like we really need to reclaim that, and in a way that looking at how different civil rights movement have been developing in the last 70 years, like we are at a time where also like in a multi-generational way where we really need to come together and really ask each other, like, how can we be in solidarity, And in a way that's also beyond like just, like doing, these small tactics or, donating here or donating there. There was actually like a slip of a tongue that was really interesting that Abhijan made in the podcast where it said mutual aid. Someone was saying mutual aid, and Abhijan was like, I just heard ritual aid. Amazing, we need to ritualize that, for instance. And I think really like we really need to think what happened in the last year and a half and what's happening now, and the change also within governmental policies, and how many of these are being spurred by like the need to keep the economy as such, while we need to change the economy as such for us to not fall sick in this way. It's a comorbid economy. So I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. It's an ongoing process, and so I think we agree there. I mean, is also being aware of the conditions in which they are taking place, but not relying on kind of traditional forms of solidarity because they were operative in the past, but actually be able to also reinvent them. And I think this is part of also your own artistic practice or your own activist practice. It also very much speaks to that. Abhijan, I don't know if you want to add anything or even later. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I think I would love to pass it along, maybe to Patricia, because I could see that she was nodding along quite enthusiastically, and I'm sure I would love to hear what she has to say here.
Absolutely.
No, I totally resonate with what Jessika is saying. Like, I don't know, like I think the whole in a way we can say like anti-capitalist movement is going like all around, like especially in Chile, we're going through this huge climate crisis because of corporations stealing water. And we just ended 1 month ago, we were almost 2 years in military curfew at 9 p.m. It started because of the protest. It ended as a pandemic thing, but of course it was a way of controlling us. The whole country is still full of police. So yeah, I'm just noting because we are going through the same here, and kind of like going through this is like understanding how to be political together in the streets, and all these kind of like real feelings that we know how to, they're like, I call them like organic technologies. We know how to do them, like what the things we can activate in ourselves. And I don't know, in a way it's very hard, but also it's very inspiring. And we are now in the process of rewriting the constitution that was written in dictatorship in the 80s. So it has been very hard because a lot of people have, people died here or murdered almost every week. It's really hardcore. So it's that thing. And at the same point, these possibilities of a little bit of hope or little change, at least in the words we use, like how is the constitution made? So yeah, it's like exciting to be participating, but it's hard, and it's like a lot of layers put together in countries that are more like less developed. It's like pandemia, dictatorship, repression, precariousness, and then it's like I was also noting, because here we also got this kind of like digital communities that were so important during the pandemic. It's like the way we kind of survive and share and talk. So it's like having this kind of contradictory relationship to being sitting down in the computer. You know, as Hannah was saying, it's like we're until here being sitting down, and it's really difficult at times, but at the same time, it's the way we are also like sharing and empowering ourselves. So yeah, it's a lot of different changes going on. And it's very nice to share, you know. It's like I think we're all dealing with the same issues in different levels. Of course, each country and each town has their own specific fights, right? Or issues.
Absolutely. Federico, do you want to follow up on this?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, this conversation anticipates a lot of what I was going to ask you, Patricia, because your work is really interesting, especially in that regard. Because I think there are two elements of this work you put together with Antonia, which was, I mean, the first aspect is the graphic visual material, sort of, that is is the poster, basically, poster that you sort of not only created but also made available to people around the world. And for those who haven't seen that, that's in the exhibition web page. You can download the poster and you can use it yourself. I think Patricia could talk a little bit more about that. But and the other aspect of the work, which is really interesting, which I would also maybe invite you to talk a little bit more. Maybe I'd like to start with this one, is the activation of the material. Because it's not only a poster that we look at, or that it was made and printed to be used once, but it's a process to be activated in the city, right? And you and Antonia activated or executed this process in Santiago, in the streets of Santiago, but you also leave this possibility of execution for anyone around the world. So that leads me to the question I want to ask first, which is the very fact that you've performed this work, you executed this work in the streets of Santiago. So what kind of urban intervention is this? What kind of experience of the city is this, in which what kind of urban landscape you experience when you're sort of executing the work, when you have, on the one hand, the COVID, right, the lockdown, the whole experience of the loss of sociabilities and of our social networks, and the diminishing of our interactions, and on the other hand, a context of an ongoing, of almost 2-year long protests in the streets, which is meeting, as just said before, a very intense repressive response by the state, with curfew and so what I would like to ask is, how is the work and the activity of executing this work related to this urban context of COVID and the curfew and the political repression?
Yeah, sure. So Antonia says hi. She's not here because she doesn't speak English, but she's here in spirit. So she has like a mural magazine, which is her poster, which is called Mercuria. So we collaborated for this poster, and the context is, of course, is like after the protest, the whole murals, like the whole street, have become like this way of speaking, So it's full of interventions, and then the government keeps painting the walls gray, and people keeps, it's like an emerging way of resisting, that the walls and the message keeps arising all the time. Of course, it's illegal to be pasting stuff in the streets. We have to be like hiding from police. Just putting the body in the street is like a political act, because like you can end in jail, basically. So we decided to do this poster because Karina asked us about like what does it mean to be in South America, this kind of map, and then like all the art or the creative objects that are on the streets are very straightforward. They're very political. They're like important messages. So we wanted to try to add some kind of like new way of thinking of this kind of like social closeness, or how to position our bodies in a way that it was more like from poetry in a way, but in the streets. So the poster kind of, I think it's also thinking about like peripheries, like how can you activate where you are at any place on the world as a center of your map. And we position this kind of real size fit. So it's like 4 people looking to each other. You can actually kind of like touch, or you can actually like be in relationship. So it's like, in a way, it's like against or remembering people how to be together in the public space, not running or not in lockdown, because we had 2 years of really strict lockdown. We couldn't even go to buy food more than twice a week. It was really hard, with the whole like horrific economic system like falling apart. So I wanted to like activate, at least in a poetic way, the new things that the new organic technologies or the new words or capabilities that we wanted for the post-corona thing. So like being in contact. Also, we use the rombo, which means in the Andean thought, it's like the 4 dimensions or 4 directions, and then just putting the hands together. It's like, we're not gonna let us go, we are together in this kind of square, looking to each other. So yeah, I think that's the context. And also, like, for these posters, we wanted to give this space in the street, because it's so hardcore, like people are dying in the streets and all that. We wanted to just propose this slowness or silent moments that people can actually like relate to the drawings in a way with the body, but also like at Mercuria's, as Antonia's editorial poster, like to read, to have a poetry or different thoughts, but in a different timing in the streets, just to like stop and give some kind of complexity more than the face-to-face, cartels. That, of course, we have been doing that, but we ended using this invitation to really propose to inhabit the streets in new ways, or maybe more subtle ways in the future with this, because I feel like the activist roads are so paved, or as Jessika was saying, the solidarity things, sometimes they're just absorbed, by the mainstream. So we try really to use new words. We're trying to, like, for example, said like, we want to read elementals, we want to read minds, or we want to connect with the movements of the planets, or we were like sending strength to this lucha florida, which means kind of like blossom fight that is going everywhere, and just seeing the earth as a way of connecting us all, but everyone has to take ownership of where we're standing at. It can be anywhere, basically.
Thanks, Patricia. That's very, very interesting, and I'm really impressed by the activation of the material in a context like that. I think that's very important, and that's no doubt part of the work. And
yes,
the website. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah, maybe I forgot to tell that the best part of going to the streets and pasting the poster is like talking to people and sharing thoughts, and we have help, and I don't know, that's part of the whole thing, just engaging in these different conversations, and yeah, making it available. Like we give it for free. We printed like 800, so it's kind of nice that it's it's not this artistic thing that is expensive. We can share, you can download it, you can put it, and yeah, engage in this bodily thinking of the new maps, right? Because at least now we are all on the digital, like this digital space. We are, so it's so militarized, as Jessika was saying too, but it's the way we are connecting. So I don't know, I think we also wanted to think about that,
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I really invite everyone to have a look at the documentation, where it's a series of photos that you took while you were sort of putting the poster out and talking to people in the street. I thought that was very, very interesting. It gives you a nice document of the work. Another thing that maybe coming out of what you were just saying now, following up on that, is the content of the poster, so to say, the things it presents. And as you said, it's all a series of, in a way, representations of gestures, but also now hearing you speak about it, I realize there are also instructions, right, of how to relate to people, how to initiate relationships or activate relationships, and what the main sort of vehicle of that is the body, the way it is in the posters, just different gestures of the body that we can see there. So I would like to ask you to talk a little bit more. Is this some sort of idea that if the city is no longer what it was, and if we are deprived of our urban spaces, or if the digital connection is making us sort of disembodied in a way, is the idea of the poster trying to sort of bring us back to the body and bring us back to the earth in this context?
Yeah, no, totally. We were really inspired in a indigenous petroglyph that we found in the north with my family in the last year, because there are foots, they're like little foots that are actually like choreographed looking to the moon, just like positioning yourself in the bigger like living space. So we were thinking, it's like we're living on the head, we just need to get all this like warm energy, accelerated energy of thoughts, we need to go down in the earth, we need to discharge in a way. So we really need to look down. And also I think more than instructions, they're just little reference, but I think if you really go over the poster and just stand up in this kind of choreography that we propose, you are actually facing in the fourth direction to other people. And if you want to touch them, you can put your hands, and it's kind of this human scale that invites to position in closeness in a way, But it was really inspiring, this petroglyph of like, how do we orientate ourselves and how do we really acknowledge where we are, like in our bodies, especially in a time of this digital acceleration and inflammation and tiredness, that we are these days. So yeah.
That's very, very interesting. Thank you.
No, thanks.
Wow, there's a lot of connectors here, isn't it? I mean, from the conversations already. And Melissandre, I have a few questions. I think we started these conversations long ago because we were also collaborating in a different project, also in Coventry. And I remember when we first talked about the Life Futures project, you kept saying that you didn't have yet a language. And also Jessika mentioned that just a couple of minutes ago or so, like the kind of the newness of the situation also being one where one doesn't have yet the language to actually convey or even be able to articulate not only what the kind of outside phenomena are, but also internally in terms of processing everything that you were going through. I mean, we all were going through. And so I think it's a little bit, my question to you, I think, is a little bit placed on that idea of lack of language, lack of knowing, or kind of also striving for an understanding of what's going on. And the work you propose, I think, speaks beautifully to that, because you did contribute with a series of audio pieces and also a video. And in the video particularly, we have that reference in a quite unique way, because we see someone breast pumping, and the title of the work is Extraction of Knowledge. So that really kind of spoke to me, especially after our conversations, spoke to me in a way of that you were sort of hinting towards a non-verbal knowledge. And in that particular piece, necessarily a knowledge that speaks to survival and also sustainability of forms of life. And so there's a lot of different elements that we were talking about here, and that I think your piece in a way kind of brings together in a beautiful and poetic manner. Do you want to tell us a little bit what brought this work about, I think, to start with, just to have a sense of the beginning of that?
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to say that I feel really privileged and honored to be in the space right now, but also to have my work featured along all of your pieces. It's been a great journey, really, to like, I didn't know any of the artists involved before. And so when we're talking about, you know, like being in community and engaging in community studies, research or whatever, this kind of moments participate to such a moment, and like such like, I don't know, like understanding, deepening of understanding sort of. So let's start with then. I don't have the languages yet. I guess that in my work, especially in the performance arts pieces that I make, I'm really interested in using, you know, this concept of object that has been discussed notably by Kristeva. I forgot the first name, sorry. Precisely.
Julia Kristeva.
Yeah. Precisely because I'm interested, like, I feel like my work is inscribed in the still ongoing war against Black bodies, right? And so when I use this concept of object, it is inscribed in Black disposability, specifically. And when I say then that I don't have, or we don't yet have the languages to speak about the present or to speak about the future, what I mean is that we don't, and then it goes back to Jessika's point, because we're living under racial capitalism, and the force is so strong. Although, like, yes, there might be elements where we can identify points where we can disrupt and like identify cracks where collectively, like at different geographical point, we can disrupt and ultimately abolish the system, hopefully within our lifetimes, but we don't know. So with back to this idea of object, I really do think that there is lots of knowledge to be drawn from ancestral forces. And so, you know, even when we talk about, like, you know, this triptych of past, present, future, I'm not sure if, without reconsidering the whole project, I'm not sure if using such Western ideas of how time is divided is helpful in the precise time and space that we are at or in right now. And so using this metaphor of, you know, like this, so the film is called Extraction of Knowledge, and I'm basically pumping milk out of my breast and making it visible, and it's also like filmed within a classroom. So, specifically, I work at Warwick University, which is a white institution, and so it's also like making a wings to the reinforcement of whiteness in me. Also, like, it's also like a self-critique in me, you know, like accepting a commission from Warwick University and Coventry University, and how do I then become complicit to the system that I'm trying to, I don't know, like I'm trying to sort of subvert the moment or the space, or like engage in a, not conflictual, but like I'm trying to question really the practices of such institutions, but at the same time I'm taking money from it. So yeah, I don't have the languages yet because it's all very, very messy, right? And to come back to some of the points that were discussed previously, I don't think that, and maybe we can engage in more like a conversational bit. I don't think that we are born knowing how to care. It is literally like something that all the things that have been said, like, is a thing that struck me, because personally, I present myself as someone who's like striving. I'm learning to love. And so if you're saying that human beings are born knowing how to care, because care and love is very like are things that I think of on like very simultaneously, and there is obviously, because we are touching upon activism, different sorts of activism, especially right now in time of like COVID or post-COVID, or however we want to frame it. I think there is lots of knowledge to be drawn from Black feminist thinkers, and a book that stayed with me across the pandemic period is this book by Bell Hooks, what is the name again? New vision of love. What's sorry? Love. New. What's do you know this? Wait. All About Love. Here you go. Here you go. All About Love. New Visions. By Bell Hooks, that I recommend to anyone who didn't yet read this book. And in this book, Bell Hooks mentions the fact that actually, like, to love, you actually need to be in a loving environment, and only by being in such environment you can develop then the skills to like you can like start to love better, sort of. And then even when you then reach the point where you can actually love, loving someone and loving well, or loving someone well takes a lot of labor. And then we come back to this potentiality of imagining labor but beyond this sick capitalist system, right? Because labor doesn't have to be like the twin of living under racial capitalism, right? We could also like think of labor as I don't know, like a social contribution, labor as pleasure as well. And then we go back to this whole like family of thinking, I don't know, this whole thinking around pleasure activism and so on, and obviously back to Black feminism, right? And I also wanted to go back to your point, Patricia. You were talking about choreography quite a lot. And recently I started to read this book that I also advise. I love books, especially by Black authors, by Faima Ife. It's on maroon choreography. So back to also the piece that I shared for this commission, there is also a text attached to this commission that is, I think, starting with fugitive speculative dreams, or speculative fugitive dreams, something like that. I didn't know like which one was better anyway, in which order the words should go one after the other. And so I do believe that personally I'm coming from survivors, but also from warriors. And because I'm an Afro and Caribbean person, and my Caribbean ancestry, where, you know, like, I don't know what to say, people were subjected to, you know, like all the things that whiteness is about, but they were also people who like escaped in mangroves, right? And created worlds, like they didn't have anything. So when we're talking about theories of the dispossessed and so on, I think that this image of those people who were enslaved by white Western people, so my islands are like Guadeloupe and Martinique, those people were enslaved, who still like we're looking for the cracks, right? They found a crack to escape and to hide in the mangroves that we can imagine here. So I'm based in Birmingham in the UK, as like a forest, for example, like to transpose the scene here. And within those like primary, like from a primary from a first from a what, an initial perspective, those spaces looked unhospitable, maybe dangerous and stuff, but still, like, from those locations of nowhere, right? Those people managed to dream about, and then beyond dreaming about, build worlds full of love, right? And those worlds, those dreams brought me here, right? So I do feel like I do feel extremely close to this time and space, and I draw lots of force from thinking and just daydreaming about the strength that I inherited from those moments out of pain, right? Again, going back to bell hooks, it's very difficult to theorize from a place of pain, right? And so from my precise embodiment, I don't really remember the question. So it was like, we don't have the languages yet. So in a way, this this is a nonsense. I don't know how to say. Otherwise, like in a way, we have like our ancestors gave us the blueprint to think through a even more difficult moments than right now, right?
Yeah.
And so we just have like this huge amount of data. And again, it's like also making the link to commodification of solidarity, mutual aid, how the capitalist system co-opt our wildest dreams, things like that, right? And going back to my point, what I was saying, yeah. So we have like this huge amount of knowledge, right? That has been systematically buried and silenced and everything. And so I do personally think that the only like the small contribution that I can make within this movement work, right, is to sort of identify then those cracks within my work. So precisely for this commission, I would just like make a full sort of polished, not polished, it's never really polished, but like a finished version of the work. And I thought that first, because like it's a commission by Warwick University and Coventry University, I'm not going like to like just, I don't know, I didn't want to exhaust myself while making the work, you know, like especially due to like who was commissioning the work. And so in one of the audio that I recorded, I just recorded something like a thought that I had like out of the bed. You know, I was lying in my bed and I recorded one of the piece of that then made it to the final commission. And then I could have collated all those elements, you know, the audio, the images, and part of the text together and to make like a finished piece. But what I wanted to sort of transmit from the place where I was at that moment, I think it was like July 2021, then I wanted to say that like it doesn't matter. In a way, like it doesn't matter, you know, if we are really to think about futurities and alternative ways of engaging with one another, my contribution didn't need to be perfect to transmit what I wanted to say. That so this dilemma and tension between like having this huge amount of knowledge and you don't know where to start or how to navigate it, and actually like not having the language to have like a one-on-one conversation on the themes that we are exploring right now. So yeah, I don't know, like it's always like, yeah, I just wanted to highlight within my piece the tension that doesn't make sense really, like, yeah, this tension. We don't have the languages yet, but why? And how can we go about it without using another colonial language? And so for me, it was bringing back the body for this precise piece. And also when I say languages, it's also acknowledging the fact that verbal languages is not, like, this is a very monolithic, thinking of language as verbal only is a very monolithic and reductive way of understanding communication. And so that's where the, embodied languages, and I'm not dismissing verbal languages, but like, I do think that we need like different webs, different sources of languages to just to feel the moment. And I guess what I liked also a lot about the, you know, how you put the website and it's looking good and all, thank you. I like the fact that it looks more like an archive of something, or like an archive of something, rather than like a sleek exhibition page. So yeah, it's more like, for me, it was more about like contributing to the moment, contributing to something that to this stage, I must say that I don't really understand fully what we're exploring. You know, like I'm not sure if any of us like really understand fully what we're exploring. But yeah, I don't know if I replied.
You did, of course, but I also feel like maybe there's, I mean, because you spoke also directly to some of the things that Jessika and Patricia mentioned. I don't know if any of you want to react to that. So you, Patricia and Jessika, just in case you feel like you want to add something.
I will just shortly connect. It's like I think a lot about all this non-verbal information that we embody in our minds and bodies and DNA. I think it's incredibly big. We need to find the cracks how to access, right? It's like we need like other minds or other ways of positioning our bodies or accessing that information. And it's funny because I also collaborated with a friend and we did a video that is called Holographic Milk. I will send to you, Melissandre, because it's just like a prayer in a way. It's like talking to our bodies or sending the desire to activate all this information that we are getting through the ancestors. And we know this is there. We just maybe don't have the language or the ways of accessing, or we have little cracks. But I do think about it a lot, and I think it's very interesting, like all the potential we have with these like human bodies. We have like all the machines and these possibilities of, like having smaller fingers or bigger eyes or seeing ultraviolet, but I'm not really interested in that. I think the inner technologies that we have, we're just starting how to like retrace them or using, and I think that's incredibly interesting for me. I think it has a lot of possibility for these ways of continuing, right? So yeah, it's a conversation that I really want to have. I have been having, and I want to have a lot in the next years, Yeah.
Thanks so much, Melissandre and Patricia. Also, with a lot of things that you both said, I deeply connect. And and also, Patricia, what you were saying in relationship to like how the pandemic is being utilized, by the state to like fortify the police state, so similar to what's happening in Lebanon also. And we should talk more. Yeah, no, really, it's very similar strategies and Melissandre, thank you so much for sharing the Bell Hooks book. I'm very much excited to. I'm gonna get it to delve into it. But also, I was saying that, and Patricia also said it very beautifully, that this organic knowledge, like to know how to organize and act together politically. And what I meant is not that like we all learn how to carry. No, carrying is always giving and taking. It's something we need to exercise. What I was referring to more is like how, in a way, like we learn this segregation, like capitalism is not at all a place of love, it's a place where also love is being commodified in different ways, and in some places it's even equated to property. So and I also totally agree with what you were saying about Melissandre, about the past, present, and future, like seeing time in this way. Recently, like in the last year, I personally found one possible way to be able to also deal with and call in a way ancestral knowledge, which is like transmillennial knowledge. And for me, it also comes as a way to counterpoint this whole loftiness and arrogance that comes with modernism, that, totally denying, dismissing knowledge practices that have been going on for millennia and millennia, and in a way trying to eradicate them or deny them or also steal them in a way and commodify them. So and I feel also this has been, now it's also, many of these things we are at a time of great transformation. So I also really hope that these also collectivizing efforts and conversations in a way continue in different ways, also beyond just conversations, because it's really hard times, and it feels like it's easy to go back to that which was not easy to be in at the first, initially. Yeah.
If it's okay for me to jump in. I'm sorry, Hannah. I also wanted to refer to what you were saying by saying that I was really moved. I was moved by all of your contributions, right? But I was also very moved by yours in terms of because it speaks a lot to what I'm attempting to do, but like you did it in a very raw way that I was really moved by. So I'm really interested by this concept of queer usage, queer using of stuff, notably inspired by Sahar Ahmed, right? I thought that there was, although I guess we coming from really different roots with the two ways of writing that word, and I thought that watching the video piece that you shared, there was a sort of familiar strangeness in it, like and that I haven't seen in a while. So I just wanted to just like say thank you for sharing this piece. I was really moved by it, extremely moved by it.
Thank you. So it was unexpected actually piece to make. It's is probably my first sort of kind of digital work, and so to have that as a brief probably pushed me to think beyond what I normally do, and actually to put myself into the work, which is something that you know, I'm behind the work. I'm not part of the actual performance. So it's interesting what you're saying, and then the things that have come out of it, the knowledges that have come after, rather than lining up what you want to talk about and what you want to say. In this, you're talking about this unknowingness of what the actual question is and what the answers might be, have really presented themselves really through the performance and the meditation on what was happening, and the unexpected contributions from the interviews and how they combined. It wasn't until that final moment when they're all edited together that this something happened that I wasn't expecting, which is again this whole kind of the importance of intuition, I suppose, that we're possibly talking about, and sort of understanding that comes from making, that isn't necessarily a primary reaction to something.
Any more thoughts, comments? It's strange not to see Abhijan, because we usually get a lot of clues just by looking at what's going on. but at the moment we don't know. So do you want just to let us know how are you feeling, and if you want to add something to what was just said?
No, I mean, it's been really lovely listening to this conversation, and also, hearing particularly from Melissandre and Patricia. Melissandre, thank you so much for sharing that sort of this very, very intimate, beautiful process. I was just kind of thinking that it feels so much in a way kind of like going back to some of the conversations that we had through these kind of post-colonial sessions, and I feel like it's kind of just putting me into this space of thinking about why it's so important to have these spaces of kind of collectivity, collective study, and just to even begin to sit together and think about what collective solidarity might be and might look like from all of these positionalities, and it's just it's just making me think that we need more of that.
Absolutely. Well, maybe I think that's a beautiful note to end with, if we all agree. I think it was amazing also to get to hear your thoughts about the work specifically, and to see how they connect in many different ways. I think for us, and I will be speaking on behalf of the co-leaders of the project just briefly, but just to say that for us was a great contribution to the ongoing inquiry, and is by no means finished. So the conversations will continue, and this is not something that will end with the termination of the project. The questions that you raised and the questions we are interested in are very much of the essence as we speak. So it will definitely be an ongoing investigation, and also a part of our, I think meditative was something that came through a lot of the different works. I'm thinking of Patricia, for instance, also Melissandre, and now you, Hannah, just mentioned that again. And I think that was quite visible in all the contributions, is the need for that sort of inwards looking in a way, or a different temporality engagement with the stuff we are going through, and at the same time not in a contradictory or even oppositional manner or fashion. There's also this strive for collectivity and togetherness. So I think the ways in which those things are going to be continued is very much TBC. We do have a sense of what's playing out for us. We are speaking as COP26 is taking place, and as meaningless and meaningful that it might look at times, I think there's a lot of also stuff coming from there, from the performances, from a lot of the things that are not said on purpose, and also how those people were, for various different reasons, identified to be making decisions on precisely life futures. And so maybe to say thank you again for your generous contributions, and we will continue the conversations in the flesh, hopefully, but definitely through other means in the future.